The cowboy who saved a woman who swore she needed no man until he brought her back to life. The town sat between long stretches of open land where the sky felt bigger than anywhere else. Dusty roads crossed fields of dry grass, and old wooden fences marked the borders between ranches that had stood for generations. People here respected quiet lives. They waved when passing by, but rarely asked too many questions. Everyone carried their own story, and most preferred to keep it that way. She had lived there longer than most newcomers. Some remembered when she first arrived years ago, driving an old truck filled with tools and very little else. She bought a small ranch that many believed was too much work for one person, especially for someone who looked so young at the time. But she never asked for help, never complained, and never slowed down. The ranch was not perfect. The paint on the barn had faded under years of sun and wind. The fences needed constant repair. The water pump sometimes refused to work when she needed it most. Yet she treated every problem like a challenge she could solve alone. Each morning she woke before sunrise, tying her hair back and stepping outside into the cool air with quiet determination. The animals recognized her voice. Horses turned their heads when she walked past. Dogs followed her footsteps with loyalty. She moved with confidence, lifting heavy tools and checking every corner of the property. People who watched from a distance admired her strength, but also noticed how little she spoke. Some called her stubborn. Others called her brave. But no one knew the full story. Years earlier, she had learned to depend only on herself. Trust had once come easily to her, but life changed that. She had lost people she believed would stay forever. Promises had broken like dry branches under pressure. Slowly she built walls around her heart, brick by brick, until independence became not just a choice, but a shield. At the local store, she spoke only when necessary. She paid in cash, nodded politely, and left before conversations could become personal. When neighbors offered assistance, she smiled lightly and said she had everything under control. And most of the time, she did. One afternoon, a new truck rolled into the area, pulling a trailer loaded with tools and supplies. Dust rose behind it as it moved slowly toward the empty ranch next to hers. The arrival caught attention because new faces were rare in such a small place. The man who stepped out looked like someone who belonged to the land. His movements were calm and steady. He wore simple work clothes and a hat that had clearly seen many seasons. Instead of making a loud introduction, he simply began unloading his equipment, working quietly as if he understood that silence was part of the landscape. Then, she noticed him from across the fence line while repairing a broken post. Her eyes lingered for only a moment before she returned to her work. New neighbors meant new expectations, and expectations were something she avoided. Days passed before they spoke. It happened by accident when one of her horses wandered too close to the shared boundary between their properties. The cowboy gently guided the animal back, keeping his movements slow so he would not startle it. When she arrived, she thanked him briefly, her tone polite but distant. "You didn't have to," she said, adjusting the rope in her hands. "It wasn't trouble," he replied simply. There was no attempt at conversation beyond that. He did not ask personal questions or offer advice. He nodded once and returned to his work, leaving her slightly surprised by the lack of pressure. The next few weeks settled into a quiet rhythm. She worked long hours, and he did the same. Sometimes they passed each other on horseback or driving along the dirt road. He raised his hand in greeting. She returned the gesture without slowing down. People in town started noticing him. Some described him as respectful, others as reserved. He listened more than he spoke, which made him easy to trust, even before anyone knew much about him. One evening, a storm rolled across the land without much warning. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and strong winds rattled the fences. She rushed to secure her animals, moving quickly between tasks. Rain began falling heavily, turning dry ground into slippery mud. While closing a gate, she slipped slightly, catching herself before falling. Pain flashed briefly through her leg, but she ignored it and continued working. The last thing she wanted was to lose control during the storm. From across the field, the cowboy noticed the struggle. He approached slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. "Need a hand?" he asked. "I've got it," she replied without hesitation. He nodded and stepped back, honoring her answer. Instead of insisting, he quietly began securing his own side of the fence, ensuring the boundary stayed strong against the wind. His actions helped stabilize the area without challenging her independence. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind broken branches and scattered debris. She worked through the cleanup alone, though her movement seemed slower than usual. The small injury from the night before had grown into a dull ache she refused to acknowledge. Later that day, she found a section of fence already repaired. Fresh boards replaced the damaged ones, and tools lay stacked neatly nearby. She knew immediately who had done it. For a moment, she felt irritation. She had not asked for help, but beneath that reaction was something unfamiliar, a quiet sense of relief. He appeared at the edge of the property, hat in hand. "Just fixing what the storm broke," he said calmly. "Hope that's all right." She hesitated before answering. "Next time, tell me first." "Fair enough," he replied with a small smile. The simplicity of his response caught her off guard. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to prove himself right, just acceptance. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with soft colors, she sat alone on the steps of her porch. The ranch stretched before her, peaceful again after the storm. Yet something felt different. For years, she had believed that needing someone meant weakness. Every challenge she faced alone became proof of her strength. But now there was someone nearby who helped without taking away her control. She did not know whether to feel grateful or uneasy. Across the field, the cowboy worked quietly, unaware of the thoughts running through her mind. He did not watch her or try to draw attention. He simply lived his life in a way that respected space. Days later, a minor accident forced them into closer interaction. While lifting a heavy bale of hay, she lost her balance and stumbled. The pain in her leg returned stronger this time. Before she could hide it, he was there, steadying the weight without making a scene. "I said I'm fine," she insisted, though her voice carried strain. "I believe you," he said calmly, still holding the bale. "But even strong people get tired." She said nothing, unsure how to respond. His words did not feel like judgment. They felt like understanding. They finished the task together in silence. When it was done, he stepped back immediately, giving her space again. That night she lay awake longer than usual, listening to the wind outside. Memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit surfaced quietly, moments of loss, times when trust had been broken. The reason she built walls returned with clarity. Yet alongside those memories was a new thought, the possibility that someone could stand beside her without trying to change who she was.
The idea felt both comforting and terrifying.
As days turned into weeks, small interactions continued. A shared nod in the morning, tools returned to their proper place without explanation, water buckets filled when she forgot. Each gesture was subtle, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. She still told herself she needed no one. That belief had protected her for too long to abandon easily, but somewhere deep inside, a small part of her began to question whether independence and connection truly had to be opposites. The weather changed quickly as the season moved forward. Days that once felt calm and predictable became filled with strong winds and colder mornings. The ranch required more work than usual, and every task seemed to take longer. She woke before sunrise as always, but lately there was a heaviness in her movements that she refused to acknowledge. The storm from weeks earlier had left more damage than she first realized. Fence lines needed constant checking. Animals were restless, and the ground had turned uneven in places. She worked alone from morning until late evening, determined to keep everything running without help. From across the property line, the cowboy noticed the signs. He watched quietly, not in a way that felt intrusive, but with the calm awareness of someone who understood hard work. He saw how she pushed through pain, how she avoided resting, even when her body clearly needed it. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered again, bringing a sharp wind that rattled the dry grass. She hurried to move supplies into the barn before the weather turned worse. As she lifted a heavy crate, her injured leg gave a sudden warning, causing her to pause for a brief moment. She glanced toward the neighboring ranch and saw him working near the fence. Their eyes met for only a second before she turned away, continuing her task as if nothing had happened. The first drops of rain arrived faster than expected. Thunder rolled across the sky, echoing through the wide open land. She rushed to close the barn doors, pulling hard against the wind. One hinge resisted, and she struggled to force it into place. Without a word, he appeared beside her, holding the other side steady. She stiffened slightly but did not protest this time. Together they secured the door before the rain grew heavier. "Storm's moving fast," he said quietly. "I noticed," she replied, brushing wet hair from her face. They stood for a moment under the shelter of the barn roof, watching the rain fall hard against the ground. It felt strange to share silence with someone else without feeling uncomfortable. "You should rest that leg," he added gently. "I'm fine," she answered automatically, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. He did not argue. Instead, he nodded and walked back toward his own property, leaving her alone with her thoughts. As the storm passed, the temperature dropped sharply. The next morning, frost covered the fields, making the ground slippery. She moved carefully, but the work did not slow. Animals needed feeding, water needed checking, and repairs never seemed to end. Later that day, she discovered one of her fences had collapsed completely under the pressure of fallen branches. The damage was larger than she expected. For a moment, frustration rose inside her, but she pushed it down and began gathering tools. She worked for hours, hammering posts into the hard ground. The sun began to set before she noticed how exhausted she felt. Her hands trembled slightly from effort. A shadow fell across the ground beside her. She did not need to look up to know who it was. "Looks like a long job," he said calmly. "I'll handle it," she replied, though her hammer paused in midair. He waited a moment before speaking again. "I know you will, but 2 people can finish before dark." She hesitated, caught between habit and practicality. Finally, she nodded once. They worked side by side without unnecessary conversation. He followed her instructions without trying to take over, which surprised her more than anything else. Most people who offered help also offered opinions. He simply listened. As they worked, she noticed how steady his movements were. There was no rush, no impatience, just quiet focus. When the last section of fence stood secure again, she stepped back and wiped dirt from her hands. "Thank you," she said softly, the words feeling unfamiliar on her tongue. "You're welcome," he replied with a simple smile. They shared a brief moment of eye contact before she turned away, unsure how to handle the sudden warmth she felt. In the following days, small changes began to appear in her routine. She found herself pausing more often, noticing details she had ignored before. The sound of another person working nearby no longer felt like an intrusion. One evening, while checking the animals, she found a bucket already filled with fresh water. She frowned slightly, recognizing the quiet gesture. Instead of feeling annoyed, she felt strangely supported. At the local store, people began commenting on the changes they noticed. "You look less tired lately," the shop owner said with a friendly smile. She shrugged, unsure how to respond. "Just getting used to the season." But inside, she knew something was different. The weight she carried alone for so long felt slightly lighter, even though she had not fully allowed anyone into her life. One afternoon, while repairing equipment, she accidentally cut her hand on a sharp edge. It was not serious, but the sting caught her off guard. Before she could wrap it, he approached with a small first aid kit. "You keep that with you?" she asked, surprised. "Abbott," he replied. "You never know when you'll need it." He cleaned the cut carefully, his movements gentle but confident. She watched silently, unsure how to react to someone caring for her without expectation.
"I could have done that myself," she said, though there was no anger in her voice.
"I know," he answered. "But you didn't have to this time." Those words stayed with her long after he walked away. That night she sat on her porch again, staring at the open fields. Memories of her past returned quietly. Times when help came with conditions, when kindness felt like a trap. She had learned to survive by trusting no one. But he was different. He did not ask for anything. He did not push past her boundaries. He simply showed up when needed and disappeared when the work was done.
The realization unsettled her more than she expected.
A few days later, heavy winds returned unexpectedly. While securing a loose tarp, she lost her balance and nearly fell from a small ladder. Strong hands caught the ladder before it tipped, steadying it until she climbed down safely. Her heart raced from the sudden scare. For a moment she leaned against the barn wall, breathing deeply. "You all right?" he asked, his voice calm. "Yes," she replied, though her hands shook slightly. He stepped back immediately, giving her space to regain control. Something shifted in her at that moment. She realized that his presence did not make her weaker. Instead, it allowed her to feel safe without losing independence. As the sun set, painting the sky in soft colors, they stood quietly watching the horizon. "You don't talk much," she said suddenly. "Neither do you," he replied with a faint smile. She almost laughed, surprised by the lightness she felt. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt comfortable, like shared understanding without needing words. Later, as she walked back toward her house, she realized that someone had helped her without trying to change her, without expecting gratitude or control. The thought unsettled her old beliefs but also brought a quiet sense of peace. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider that maybe strength did not mean doing everything alone. The days slowly grew calmer after the storms, but life on the ranch never truly slowed down. Morning light stretched across the fields like a soft promise, and the air carried the quiet sounds of animals waking and wind brushing through tall grass. She continued her routine, rising early and moving through her tasks with steady focus. Yet something inside her had begun to shift, even if she tried not to notice it. The cowboy's presence next door had become part of her daily landscape. She no longer felt surprised when she saw him repairing something along the fence line or riding slowly across his land. Sometimes they worked close enough to hear each other's footsteps, yet neither felt the need to fill the silence with unnecessary words. One morning, while fixing a loose gate, she realized she was humming softly to herself. The sound startled her because she had not done that in years. For a moment she paused, wondering when she had last felt calm enough to do something so simple. Across the fence, he lifted a hand in greeting. She returned the gesture without thinking. The exchange felt natural, almost easy. As the weeks passed, small moments began to connect them in ways she had not expected. They shared tools when needed, exchanged short conversations about weather or animals, and occasionally worked together when a task required more than one person. Each interaction felt unforced, and that made it harder for her to maintain the emotional distance she had built for so long. One afternoon, they worked side by side repairing a broken water line. The ground was dry and hard, making the work slow. He listened carefully as she explained how the system worked, following her instructions without interruption. "You've done this before," she said, watching him adjust the pipe with skill. "Different places," he replied. "Same problems." She nodded, appreciating the simplicity of his answer. There was no attempt to impress her, no need to prove anything, just quiet competence. As they worked, she found herself talking more than usual. Stories slipped out without planning. Small memories about the ranch, lessons she learned the hard way, mistakes that taught her resilience. She realized halfway through that she was sharing pieces of herself she normally kept hidden. He listened without judgment, offering only occasional comments that showed he understood. Later that evening, she sat on her porch thinking about the conversation. A part of her felt uneasy. Opening up had always led to disappointment before. She reminded herself to be careful, to keep boundaries strong. But another part of her felt lighter, as if a weight she had carried for years had shifted slightly. Days later, a local gathering took place in town, a small event where neighbors met to share food and conversation. She rarely attended such gatherings, preferring the quiet of her ranch. Yet this time she found herself considering it. When she arrived, people greeted her warmly but with surprise. Some noticed the cowboy nearby and smiled knowingly, though neither of them paid attention to the quiet speculation. They spoke briefly, sharing simple conversation that felt easy among the noise of the crowd. She realized she did not feel the usual urge to leave quickly.
Instead, she stayed longer than expected, listening to stories and laughing softly at a joke someone told.
The following week brought a different kind of challenge. Long hours of work and changing weather began affecting her health. She ignored the signs at first: headaches, fatigue, and moments when her focus slipped. She pushed herself harder, determined not to show weakness. One afternoon, while stacking supplies, she suddenly felt dizzy. The world tilted slightly, forcing her to sit down before she lost balance completely. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly until the feeling passed. When she opened them, he stood nearby, concern visible but restrained. "I'm fine," she said quickly, before he could speak. He nodded, respecting her words but not leaving immediately. "Sometimes fine means tired," he said gently. She looked away, unsure how to respond. The truth in his voice made it harder to deny her exhaustion. "I just need a minute," she added. He sat on a nearby fence without saying anything else. The quiet support felt different from pity. It felt like someone standing beside her without trying to take control. After a while, she stood again, stronger but thoughtful. That evening, she found herself reflecting on the past more deeply than usual. Memories of earlier years surfaced, times when she trusted people who later left, promises that faded, and the moment she decided she would never rely on anyone again. Independence had become her shield, protecting her from disappointment. But now she faced a new reality. Someone had entered her life who did not challenge her strength or demand change. He simply existed beside her, steady and patient. The shift unsettled her. A few days later, a misunderstanding created distance between them. While working together, he suggested an easier way to repair a section of fencing. She immediately felt defensive, interpreting the suggestion as criticism.
"I know how to handle my own ranch," she said sharply. He stepped back, surprised by the reaction.
"I wasn't saying you didn't." Silence fell heavily between them. She turned away, continuing the work alone. He respected her space and left without argument. That evening, regret crept into her thoughts. She replayed the moment repeatedly, realizing he had not meant to question her ability. The reaction came from old fears, not from his actions. Days passed with less interaction. The absence felt heavier than she expected. She missed the quiet companionship, though she refused to admit it aloud. Finally, after several days, she crossed the fence line toward his property. He looked up from his work, calm as always. "I overreacted," she said simply. He nodded once. "It happens." The lack of blame made the apology easier. They returned to working together slowly, rebuilding the comfortable rhythm they had begun to form. This time, she felt more aware of her own reactions, recognizing how past experiences shaped her present behavior. One evening, as the sun set in soft colors across the sky, they sat on opposite sides of the fence, watching the horizon. "You ever get tired of doing everything alone?" he asked quietly. She hesitated before answering.
"I learned a long time ago that it's safer that way. Safer doesn't always mean better,"
he said gently. His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. That night she lay awake thinking about what strength truly meant. For years she believed strength meant standing alone, never needing anyone, never showing weakness. But lately she had felt something different, a kind of strength that came from trust, from shared effort, from allowing someone to stand beside her without fear. The realization both comforted and frightened her. As days turned into weeks, she began allowing small changes into her life. She accepted help more easily. She laughed more often. The ranch felt less like a battle and more like a place of peace. Yet deep inside, she still feared losing control. Trust required vulnerability, and vulnerability had once caused pain she never wanted to experience again. Still, she could not deny that something important was growing between them. Not sudden romance, not dramatic emotion, but quiet understanding built through shared moments and mutual respect. The seasons continued to change, and the ranch became a place where both routine and unexpected challenges arrived together. The sun rose early each morning, casting long shadows across the fields. She moved through her chores with determination, but the small cracks she had begun to notice in her emotional walls were becoming wider. She started noticing things she had ignored for years, the way the wind carried sounds across the open land, the quiet movements of her animals, and even the subtle presence of the cowboy next door. The cowboy had become a steady rhythm in her life. He worked quietly, never interfering, never demanding, yet somehow always being there when needed. She began to notice little gestures, tools returned to their proper place, fences repaired without a word, buckets of water filled, and small acts that made her days a little easier. It was not grand help or dramatic heroism. It was consistent, thoughtful presence. She had never experienced anything like it before. One afternoon, a health scare reminded her how fragile she could be. While lifting a hay bale, her leg, which had been injured months ago, gave a sharp pain. She stumbled slightly and nearly lost her balance. The sudden fear that she might fall or worse made her pause, gripping the bale tightly. Before she could regain her stance, strong hands steadied the load. She looked up to see him, calm and steady, without a trace of impatience. "Careful," he said simply. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, though the sharp ache in her leg told another story. "You don't have to do everything alone," he said, his voice soft. "Even strong people need help sometimes." For a moment she could not speak. Back in mind, times came. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that she could not ignore. She had spent years believing that asking for help meant weakness. Now she realized that strength could also mean allowing someone else to stand beside her. After the incident, she rested for a short while. He stayed nearby, quietly performing his own work, giving her space without abandoning her. The balance between presence and respect was something she had never experienced before. Over the next few days, their interactions became even more natural. They worked together on repairs, shared meals during long afternoons, and spoke about everyday things: the weather, the animals, and the land. Conversations were easy, unforced, and often filled with laughter. She found herself opening up more than she had in years, sharing memories of past struggles and small joys. One evening, as the sky was painted with soft orange and pink hues, she looked out across the fields and realized how much she had begun to rely on his quiet companionship. It was not dependency, but it was connection, something she had long believed she did not need. Yet the presence of someone who respected her independence without judgment was comforting in a way she did not expect. Then came a moment that tested everything she had learned. A sudden accident on the ranch, an animal trapped, a fence collapsing, or a tool slipping, put her in real danger. She reacted instinctively, but the situation escalated faster than she could handle alone. The cowboy arrived just in time, steadying the situation and guiding her through it with calm, clear instructions. Once the danger passed, she was shaken. Her heart raced, and for the first time in years, she felt the vulnerability she had spent a lifetime hiding. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "You don't have to face everything alone," he said again, repeating words that had started to sink in over time. She took a deep breath and realized he was not asking to control her or take away her independence. He was offering support, presence, and trust. The difference was profound. The next few days were quieter, but she noticed changes within herself. Tasks that had once felt like burdens were easier to manage. She laughed more freely, smiled more often, and allowed herself moments of rest without guilt. She discovered that strength was not measured by how much she could do alone, but by how well she could accept help without losing herself. At times she caught herself watching him across the field, noting the ease with which he moved and the patience in his actions. She realized that her walls were coming down not because he had broken them, but because he had never tried. His respect for her boundaries allowed her to lower them naturally. A week later, another storm approached. This one was stronger, with wind gusts that threatened to tear fences apart and heavy clouds that rolled across the sky. She moved quickly to secure animals and repair damage. Her legs were tired, her hands raw from work, and for the first time, she asked for help without hesitation. He arrived immediately, ready to assist without a word of criticism. Together they worked efficiently, securing fences, moving animals, and protecting the barn. They shared the physical labor, but also the emotional relief of facing the storm together. After the storm passed, they stood side by side, watching the sunlight break through clouds and illuminate the land. She felt a deep sense of gratitude that was quiet and honest, not loud or dramatic. "You did well," he said simply, nodding toward her as she surveyed the ranch. "We did well," she corrected, smiling faintly. The words felt strange on her lips, but true in her heart. That evening she sat alone on her porch, reflecting on the past months. She realized that she had begun to trust again. Not blindly, not with reckless hope, but in a measured, thoughtful way. She understood that opening herself to someone's presence did not diminish her strength. It enhanced it. Over time, the relationship between them evolved into a natural partnership. She remained independent, capable, and self-reliant. But she no longer carried every burden alone. He was no longer just the cowboy next door. He had become a constant in her life, someone she could rely on without fear of losing herself. Life on the ranch regained a sense of balance. Work continued, challenges arose, and the land required constant attention, but she faced it all with renewed energy. The quiet companionship, mutual respect and understanding between them allowed her to see that connection and independence could coexist. One afternoon, while repairing the barn roof together, she looked at him and realized something important. Strength was not just about surviving alone. It was about choosing who to let in, trusting them with parts of life that had been carefully guarded, and finding joy in shared moments. "I never believed I needed anyone," she admitted quietly, more to herself than to him. "You never had to," he replied softly. "But sometimes it's nice to have someone beside you." The words hung in the air, simple, yet profound. She realized that her belief in solitude had protected her in the past, but it had also limited her experience of life. Allowing someone in did not make her weaker. It made her stronger in ways she had never known. Days turned into weeks, and the seasons changed again. The ranch flourished under their joint care. Animals were healthy, fences stood strong, and the land was well tended. The quiet bond between them became unspoken but deeply felt. She no longer feared the idea of relying on someone because she had learned that true support did not demand surrender. He had brought stability, trust, and quiet strength into her life, teaching her that living fully meant accepting help without giving up her independence. The sun set each evening with a calm glow across the fields, and she often paused to watch it, appreciating the peace she had found. She understood that life could be shared without losing herself, and that strength could be measured not just by what she did alone, but by what she could do together with someone she trusted. In those moments, she realized she was no longer just surviving. She was learning to live again, embracing connection and quiet companionship as a part of her own strength. The cowboy had not changed her. He had shown her that life could be stronger and fuller when shared, and that was a lesson she would carry with her forever. The ranch had settled into a calm rhythm, but life never remained quiet for long. Mornings were still crisp, with dew on the grass and a soft breeze moving across the open land. She woke before sunrise as she always had, but the tasks she faced no longer felt as overwhelming. The presence of the cowboy next door had become a steady support, a quiet reassurance she had never realized she needed. The past months had changed her. She had learned to trust again, in a measured way, slowly and cautiously. She no longer carried the weight of every task alone. He did not do her work for her or take over, but he was there when it mattered, steady, patient, and understanding. That quiet consistency had become part of her life, so natural she barely noticed it most days. One morning as she checked the fences, she noticed one of the horses limping slightly. The animal had likely stepped on something sharp. She moved quickly to help, but the horse was frightened and resisted her attempts. She felt her frustration rising, remembering the long hours and hard work she had endured. Before she could continue struggling alone, he arrived quietly at her side, calm and composed. "Let me help," he said softly. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Together, they guided the horse to a safer spot. His presence made the process smoother, not because he was stronger or more skilled, but because he remained calm, giving both her and the animal confidence. Once the horse was settled, she looked at him, a faint smile appearing on her face. "Thank you," she said, feeling the words mean more than she expected. "You're welcome," he replied. "You don't have to do everything alone." The simplicity of his words, repeated so often over the past months, now carried weight. She realized that accepting help did not diminish her strength, it enhanced it. The days moved on, filled with work and small moments of connection. They repaired fences, tended to the animals, and shared quiet meals after long afternoons. Conversations were simple, about the weather, the land, and the animals. But these shared moments had become a lifeline for her. For the first time in years, she did not feel the need to guard every word or keep every emotion locked away. One afternoon, a new challenge arose. A heavy storm had damaged part of the barn roof, leaving it unstable. She assessed the damage alone at first, but the scale of the work was too great for one person. For the first time, she asked for help openly. He arrived quickly, ready to assist without judgment or comment. Together, they worked carefully, lifting beams and securing the roof. The physical labor was hard, but the teamwork made it manageable. She felt a sense of relief she had not allowed herself to feel in years. After the work was done, they stood together watching the storm clouds drift away. The air smelled fresh, and the sun broke through, illuminating the land with a soft glow. She felt a deep sense of peace. In the quiet of that moment, she reflected on how far she had come. She had once believed that needing someone was weakness, that trust only led to disappointment. Yet here she was, standing beside someone who had never demanded control or expected her to change. His support had taught her a new kind of strength, the kind that comes from connection, understanding, and shared effort. Over the following weeks, life on the ranch became even more harmonious. Tasks were still demanding, but the shared work allowed her to focus more, worry less, and even enjoy the daily rhythm. She laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and allowed herself moments of rest without guilt. The cowboy's presence became a quiet reassurance in moments of uncertainty. When the weather turned harsh, when an animal needed care, or when the work felt endless, he was there. His support was steady and unwavering, never intrusive, but always reliable. She began to realize that strength was not only measured by what she could do alone, but also by what she could share with someone she trusted. One evening, as the sun dipped low across the fields, painting the sky with soft oranges and pinks, she sat on the porch and reflected on the past months. She remembered the first time they had worked together during the storm, the quiet gestures of support, and the moments when she had felt fear and vulnerability. She had learned that allowing someone into her life did not make her weak. It made her life richer, fuller, and stronger. Across the fence he worked quietly, adjusting tools and checking the animals. She noticed the care he took in every task, the way he moved with patience and thoughtfulness. She realized that she no longer feared relying on him, and that the thought of his absence felt uncomfortable. The truth was undeniable. She had come to value his presence more than she expected. Weeks turned into months, and the ranch thrived under their combined effort. The animals were healthy, fences were sturdy, and the land felt alive under their care. Their connection, built over time through shared work, mutual respect, and quiet understanding, had deepened without dramatic declarations or forced emotions. It was simple, real, and profound. She found herself noticing small details. The way he listened without judgment, the way he never tried to control her, the way he offered help only when needed. These small actions had become the foundation of her trust, a trust she had long thought impossible to give again. One afternoon, while repairing the barn together, she paused to look at him. "I used to think strength meant doing everything alone," she admitted quietly. He looked at her with calm understanding. "It can sometimes," But it can also mean knowing who to let in and when. The words resonated deeply. She realized that the life she had built, the independence she had fought to maintain, and the walls she had carefully constructed could coexist with connection. Trust did not erase her strength, it complemented it. As the sun set and the land glowed softly under the fading light, she felt a sense of completion she had not known before. The journey from isolation to trust had been gradual, marked by small moments of patient support and understanding. She had learned that allowing someone beside her did not threaten her independence, but reinforced it in ways she could not have imagined. In the days that followed, life continued in its natural rhythm. They worked together, shared quiet moments, and faced challenges side by side. She remained independent, capable, and self-reliant, yet she was no longer alone. The cowboy had not changed who she was. He had shown her that life could be fuller and richer when shared with someone she could trust. She had been saved not by dramatic gestures, but by quiet consistency, patient support, and unwavering respect for her independence. For the first time in years, she understood that living fully meant both strength and connection. Standing on the porch one evening, watching the sun sink below the horizon, she felt a sense of peace. Life was not perfect, but it was shared. She had learned that strength could come from independence and connection together, that trust did not mean weakness, and that allowing someone into her life could bring life back to her in ways she had never expected. The ranch, the animals, the fields, and even the quiet presence of the cowboy had become part of a new life. One where she could be strong, independent, and yet fully alive, knowing that she no longer needed to face the world entirely alone.